My name is Doug Felton, and I'm from Northfield, Minnesota. I became a borrower of Farm Credit in 1966, so I'm coming up on almost 50 years with the Farm Credit system. Our home farm is a very light soil, sandy farm, so we were sand farmers. And my father was a very good farmer, but if we had any extended period of time where there was a shortage of rainfall, we'd lose our crops. And so we lived very modestly, and you look back, we were always clean and fed well, but we were poor. And because of that sand farm, my parents went over to Central Sands of Wisconsin because they had to make some changes. And over in central Wisconsin, there was irrigation. And that summer, 1966, my parents sat underneath the end gun of a center pivot, and they actually cried because they could see the difference. And so they went home, and they went to the local PCA. Mr. Lloyd Larson was the gentleman, a loan officer at the time, and they made application to install irrigation on that home farm. We got enough water, the system was there, and so 1967 was the first year that my parents could routinely expect a crop, and that's because of Farm Credit. So I started with nothing, and now we have 24 pivots of our own, and so it gave me the opportunity to build my business, and without the Farm Credit system, I wouldn't have what I have.
My name is Jimmy Carter. We're celebrating our 75th anniversary this year as a local farm there in the McDonough, Georgia area. Our farm has been financed with Farm Credit since back in the 1950s. That's some of the memories I have of going to Farm Credit to seek funding for our dairy farm operation. Since that time, I actually sold out of the dairy business in 1986, and then we began a beef cattle hay operation there on the farm. But our son came back to the farm and in around 2005 and had some unique ideas, transitioning from a dairy farm, which I had already sold out, to beef cattle to hay, but then to provide educational field trips, to have a fun time for families to come out to the farm. So what we have become now is a pick-your-own farm for strawberries, blueberries. We have a corn maze, and we do a lot of educational field trips for school children in the Atlanta metro area. And this is quite satisfying to us to be able to try to provide an educational background for school children who really today in our community have no idea where food comes from. It used to be that if you didn't live on a farm, your grandparents did, but now we're several generations removed from that. Agriculture is entering and is continuing to go into a cycle where it's actually exciting to be a part of agriculture because of the new technology that's coming into agriculture and for the opportunity to help feed the world.
Yeah, I'm Mary Fritz, and I'm from Chester, Montana. I had a reputation as being a farmer, a farm partner, and they asked me to run for a position for a local advisory committee. And I was a little leery, but I said, well, why not? You know, I think I know as much as the next guy was a guy. And it just kind of spiraled from there. I served on that local advisory board for just a year before I was elected to Northwest Farm Credit's board. And I reached term limits on that board, and I've served on CoBank's board since 2003, and I think on the council since 2008. Farm Credit not only financed my operation, but as part of my personal development, I mean, it's given me a chance to probably exceed where other ladies maybe in the same kind of operation haven't.
I'm Ernie Digs from Paris, Tennessee, which is located in western part of the state. My story begins in 1978. I was 26 years old. I'd never borrowed any money outside the family. I went into a federal land bank and asked for enough money to build a new home. I had just been engaged and wanted to start a new home for my family. My son currently farms with me, so I have high hopes and high expectations. He has just moved in this week to the house where we took our first farm credit loan to build. that was about 35 years ago that all took place with that first house. Now he will have a family to raise there in that house, and I'm proud to see him making that choice, because as a lot of us are aware that we're all here because farming is a lifestyle. It's not necessarily just an occupation, but we choose it because that's what we love. I think it's important for us to know where we've been before we know where we're going. We have a lot of customers out there that are very loyal to the organization. They've had their needs met over the years in a variety of ways. We need to be ready to meet the future, whatever it brings, and I think to know where we've been, that will show us where we're going.
My name's Jim Caldwell. I am with Central Kentucky Ag Credit in Lexington, Kentucky. You know, we hear a lot of folks these days talk about local and the importance of being local in the agricultural industry. And you can't get much more local than a local farm credit association. A lot of our staff are part-time farmers. They loan money during the day and go home and get on the tractor in the evening. They live and work in the same communities as these customers do. And so they understand the struggles, they understand the challenges that folks have. One of the neat things about Central Kentucky Ag Credit is we are still serving the 17 counties that we served in 1934 when we were originated. Our big challenge right now is we've transitioned. We have had, like a lot of the baby boomers are moving on. So a lot of those folks who are steeped in that tradition are moving out. And so we're trying to pass along all that institutional knowledge, but also the history and the importance of the history in our association. We rarely get together with the staff that we don't talk a little bit about, from whence we came, and talk about how important it is that we do a good job of protecting that hard-earned capital that's been earned by those farmers of Central Kentucky over 80 years.
I'm Jimmy Dodson. I'm born in Nueces County, Texas, near Corpus Christi. My story started about 6 months before I was born. We were right in the middle of, at that time, the largest drought that our part of Texas had ever experienced. During the hard times of the drought, some of the commercial banks were having trouble staying with the producers, and my dad, had a growing family and was worried about, losing the financial home. And one of the neighbors said, "You need to go talk to them over at PCA." We went through all kinds of scenarios on the farm, a lot of good years and some bad ones too. And farm credit became part of our family heritage. And so when I went off to college and studied ag economics, it was during the 70s whenever I wasn't sure that I'd get to come back to the farm, because even though economic times were good, I didn't think there would be any land for me to operate, because so many people wanted to be involved in agriculture at that time. It was a time not unlike this that we're in. And so one weekend, my wife and I, coming home from college, getting ready to mail out resumes and choose a career path, we're visiting with my parents as we're loading the suitcases back in the car to go back to school. And my dad said, "Oh, by the way, one of our neighbors is going to retire from farming," and he offered me a chance to lease all of his land, about 1,400 acres, and to buy his equipment. And it looks like a great opportunity, but I'm going to have to tell him no, because it's too much for me and your mother to do by herself. And I paused for a minute and said, "Dad, have you ever thought about a partnership?" And he said, "Who did you have in mind?" And I said, "Well, me." And the whole point of this was that he had already talked to the Production Credit Association and lined up financing, and he was going to obviously co-sign the note for a young man like me, but he had a plan working, but he didn't want me to commit to it unless I was sure that it was what I wanted to do with my life. I finished up my last semester at school and then came home and we planted our first crop in 1974, and the rest has been history for me.